apakah korelasi dan juga unjuran ekonomi? Tadi Malaysia Outlook Conference 2024, Ensuring Stability Delivers. Kita bersama dengan pakar ekonomi dari World Bank, Apurva Sanghi. Di satu event ini kita dengarkan ucapan beliau sekarang secara langsung.
Overview of what's happening in the global economy. And people often actually refer to me as a walking global economy. You know why? My hairline is in recession. My stomach's a victim of inflation. And together, that puts me in a Great Depression. So you have the walking global economy in front of you. Now, show of hands, please. If you've heard of Elvis Presley, or if you're an Elvis fan, just raise your hand. Okay, practically everyone. Now, Elvis once sang, "We're caught in a trap." The song Suspicious Minds, "We're caught in a trap." Now, had Elvis made it as an economist, today he would sing, "We are caught in a low growth, low investment, low cooperation trap." Let me elaborate a few sentences on each. Low growth. So we, the World Bank, expect global growth to slow down to 2.4% this year. This will be the third consecutive deceleration. We're in the slowest half decade of growth in the last 30 years. Low investment. Investment cycles world over have been rudely disrupted by high interest rates. And low cooperation. We, the World Bank, we counted over 3,000 new restrictions imposed on global trade in 2022. This is 3 times more than in 2019. So trade is fragmented like never before. So the global environment is a somber one. And the 2 economies that Malaysia is most sensitive to are the US and China. Now, we crunched the numbers, and I won't bore you with them, but found interestingly that even though China is Malaysia's largest trading partner, it is changes in the US economy that have a much greater impact on the Malaysian economy than China does. It's probably because the US economy is still about a quarter bigger than China's, and over 80% of Malaysian trade is still invoiced in US dollars. So the upshot of all this is that this is going to be a topsy-turvy year. In fact, I like to think of this year as an economic version of Michel Yeoh's Everything Everywhere All at Once. And the question is, what can Malaysia do? Well, first and foremost, sticking to the theme of the conference, it can ensure and deepen stability. But what stability are we talking about? Is it political stability or policy stability? Now, as Tunku Zen so articulately highlighted, Malaysia has been through one heck of a roller coaster ride. 4 prime ministers in 4 years, a truly, genuinely first coalitional government, and going back the seminal 2018 GE results that turned the page on an era of political stability. And the common view is that political stability in Malaysia hurts the economy. But does that have to be the case? So take neighboring Thailand, which has been subject to multiple coups and political changes. Yet there's been remarkable policy stability in terms of tax policies, business regulatory frameworks, adherence to prudent macro buffers, and so on. So what was Thailand's driver of policy stability? Well, it stemmed from after the Asian financial crisis, which etched never again in the Thai DNA. And so technocrats and laws kept the macro intact. And that made the comeback stronger than the setback. Peru is another poster child of political instability. 10 presidents since 2000. 6 presidents in less than 6 years. 1 took his life. Others are either in prison, absconding, or pilloried because of corruption charges. Yet, in the 2 decades since 2000, Peru has managed stable fiscal policies and relatively strong growth. What was Peru's stability driver? So when I talk to my World Bank colleagues who work in Peru, they talk about how they have worked with 3 different administrations in Peru, but their technical counterparts in key ministries have been the same, with many being promoted based on merit. They praise the highly competent central banker who served through various administrations. So in essence, Peru's stability driver, I guess you could argue, is meritocracy and technical competence, the caliber of technocrats, how they are appointed, retained, and promoted. Take Poland, which over the last 30 years has changed governments about 20 times or so, but is stuck to its reform trajectory and reached high income status only after 15 years of becoming middle income. In contrast, Malaysia has been stuck in a middle income trap for over 30 years. What was Poland's stability driver? Well, it was external, accession to the EU, which bound the hands of future administrations to come. The examples go on, but my message here is not to say that political instability does not matter. Of course it does, especially for long-term thinking, but it need not always translate into policy instability if you ensure and deepen these stability drivers that I alluded to. And I would submit that Malaysia has many, but not all, of these stability drivers. So for example, it was a civil service here, warts and all, that kept the country on a stable footing during tumultuous political times. Malaysia is subject to various regional and global treaties that serve somewhat as an external policy anchor, and so on. But it's also important to recognize that stability is necessary but not sufficient. Stability is only a prerequisite to growth, and Malaysia needs more growth. And today I want to highlight Malaysia's untapped growth drivers, not the usual ones that you'll hear in every other conference, the commodities, E&E, tourism, etc., but rather those that don't get much talked about, yet have the potential to fundamentally alter Malaysia's growth trajectory. And I group them under what I call the 3 S's. So the first S is subnational. Now, many countries, including neighboring Philippines and Indonesia, have benefited from fiscal and functional decentralization to subnational entities, states, cities, municipalities, etc. But Malaysian states hardly have any fiscal autonomy. They really can't raise their own taxes or issue debt in markets. Now, of course, decentralization has to be done carefully, but it is striking that in 2024, if you need to open a school or a hospital in Kelantan or Sabah, you still need to come knocking on Putajaya's doors. This breeds excessive federal dependency and undermines local development. It's also telling that of the 13 states and 3 federal territories in Malaysia, only 4 are above our World Bank high income threshold. So even if Malaysia became high income, most Malaysians would ask, how come I live in a rich country when my state is poor? So unlocking growth at subnational levels is one untapped and overlooked growth driver for Malaysia. The second S I call services. Now take the NIMP, the National Industrial Master Plan, which is a rather nice roadmap to boost sagging investment in Malaysia. And even though the I in NIMP stands for industrial, it is services, financial, digital, legal, accounting, logistics, which will play an equally vital role in actualizing the NIMP's goals. Yet, services remain highly restrictive in Malaysia. It is telling that a lawyer from Peninsular Malaysia cannot practice in Sabah or Sarawak. Now, I know there are reasons for that, but services are restrictive. And the overall statistics bear this out. Of 50-odd countries that the OECD studies, Malaysia is the 8th most services trade restrictive country. And as a point of reference, Japan is the least. So services are another untapped growth driver. Now, one area where Malaysia is poised to take off in services is Islamic finance. As many of you may know, Malaysia was the very first country in the world to issue a green sukuk. Now, Islamic finance is based on Islamic principles of justice, fairness, transparency. But I'd like to make the point that these principles are not Islam-specific. They're universal in nature. So scaling up tools such as zakat and wakaf can lead to growth that is balanced, sustainable, and inclusive, which is what the entire world, not just the Muslim world, needs. Moving on to the third S, sustainability. Now, a lot has been said in this area, but let me make one overlooked point. In this region, in Southeast Asia, it is Malaysia and Indonesia, the only two countries that have forests at scale. So how well Malaysia manages its forests can be beneficial, not just nationally, but regionally and globally. And here I must applaud Malaysia's use of EFTs, ecological fiscal transfers, which are federal fiscal transfers to incentivize states to better take care of the biodiversity. Indeed, Malaysia is one of the few countries innovating on this frontier, but a lot more can be done to unlock the sustainability growth driver. So to sum up so far, political stability or policy instability. So political instability does not need to translate into policy instability, but stability is necessary and not sufficient, and these three S's, subnational services, sustainability, underpinned by stability, can really help unlock Malaysia's growth potential. Now I'm going to switch gears a bit. For this talk, I polled Malaysians through a small platform you might have heard of, X, formerly known as Twitter, suggestions on how to make a boring economist's talk less boring. And two themes came up repeatedly: implementation and Malaysia's value proposition. So Malaysians wanted to hear my views on these two topics. What do I view are the implementation issues in Malaysia, and what do I think of as Malaysia's value proposition? And that's what I'm going to conclude with. So let's talk implementation. I want you all to play along with me. I'm going to ask you a very simple riddle. Don't overthink it. It is a trick question, so just go with your gut. There are 3 birds sitting on a tree branch, 3 birds. 2 of them decide to fly away. How many are left? 1, I mean, it's a trick question. The instinct is to say 1. So 3 birds decide to fly away. How many are left? 1. The answer is still 3. Why? Because there's a difference between deciding and doing. All right? And this is Malaysia's problem. Malaysia has many, many roadmaps and plans and blueprints, etc., but it gets stuck at the implementation stage, because implementation is where the policy rubber hits the rockyard's road. To rattle off some statistics, there are 17 odd agencies that provide over 160 plus social assistance programs. There are over 70 agencies for skills training, over 30 agencies for SME digitalization. And let me give you a very specific example. Take something as apolitical as preschooling. Now, one ministry collects data on preschools, another on childcare, but hardly any efforts are made to combine these 2 data sets. And because many operators run both childcare and preschools, they need to get separate licenses from both ministries. Not only that, they're also required to have separate premises with separate entrances. And the obvious outcome, in case you didn't already guess it, is that many private preschools operate without licenses, making them illegal. Now, overlapping mandates and working in silos and excessive fragmentation are obvious reasons for poor implementation, but there is another often overlooked one, and that is the lack of a culture of independent monitoring and evaluation in Malaysia. I firmly believe that, and I've been in the development business, I guess you could say since the day I was born. I was born in a developing country, and that's been my passion throughout. And one thing I realize is that development is a game of snakes and ladders. There is no quick cut, copy, and paste. So experimentation is necessary and required. You may not know how things work, you go and experiment. That is fine. But so is learning. Now, I laud many government initiatives that have been launched in the 2 years I've been here. But I ask, where is the impact evaluation of such programs that allow us to learn and improve, How do we know if a policy failed? If a policy failed, it was because we may not have known enough, because we were wrong, or because we see what we want to see. I'll give you a specific example. You might have heard of the SPM, the Madani Medical Scheme, that subsidizes outpatient care for poorer people. It was first piloted last year in June. It was upscaled in September, and then downscaled again just to 10 districts just last month. But I ask you, what was the impact evaluation behind these decisions? And was the impact evaluation, even if it was done, was it independent or was it communicated to the public? How can a rakyat know whether upscaling was a good idea in the first place last year, or whether the subsequent downscaling was a good idea last week? To cite one telling statistic, one rough proxy of a country's impact evaluation culture is the number of registered RCTs, something called randomized controlled trials. Don't worry if you don't know what it means, it's just perfectly okay, but it's just one metric. Let me share with you some numbers. Indonesia has over 90 registered RCTs. Vietnam, about 40. You know how many Malaysia has? 0. So, by all means, fail, experiment, fail often, but fail fast, fail early, and fail forward. Learn from failure instead of failing to learn. Finally, and I'm going to conclude with this, the question of what is Malaysia's value proposition. Now, every economy has issues, and some of you may know that I'm not exactly shy in pointing them out here in the case of Malaysia. But I deeply believe that Malaysia has a value proposition that is unique. Currently, Malaysia has stable and low inflation, low unemployment, low foreign denominated debt. It has a strong base of semiconductor exports. It is beginning to reform subsidies and reviving investments. It can be a global leader in Islamic finance. It has a deep domestic investor base, and it is even well insulated from most disasters vis-a-vis the ring of fire countries such as Philippines or Indonesia. It has land and resources that, with the right agricultural policies in particular, can turn it into a contributor to regional and global food security. And all these fundamentals are now underpinned by a stable government, which hopefully has a clear 4-year runway, notwithstanding what Tunku Zain said. So reforms that amplify them can make Malaysia soar. That, to me, is Malaysia's value proposition, and that is also the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Okey, itu ucapan oleh pakar ekonomi dari World Bank, dan kita akan membawakan perincian lanjut tentang perkara tersebut, dan juga rakan setugas Nabila Khalida akan berada di lokasi untuk membawakan perkembangan tersebut. Dan paling penting apa yang disebutkan oleh pakar ekonomi tadi adalah melihat kepada realiti ekonomi semasa, dan juga yang paling contohnya seperti yang dibawakan contoh di Peru dan sebagainya. Ini sangat penting sebab di negara AWANI kita pada bincangkan perkara ini. Bagaimanakah pertukaran kerajaan ataupun rejim kepimpinan dan sebagainya tidak harus mengganggu segala dasar ekonomi yang ada. Ini penting sebab contohnya itu lebih kurang dekat dengan Malaysia. Badan ataupun pakar yang ada yang menggerakkan dasar tersebut tidak harus diganggu, dan orang-orang yang pakar harus dibawa masuk, teknokrat dan sebagainya. Sebab itu pertumbuhan itu kekal mampan dan sebagainya.